Russia has come under attack within its borders with increasing frequency in recent months, including artillery and drone strikes targeting towns and villages near the Ukrainian border. A cross-border attack has been taking place from Ukraine to Russia's Belgorod region for 15 days, and explosions occur every day at important Russian military facilities in Russia's strategic border cities such as Belgorod, Bryansk, and Krasnodar. Mysterious drones attacked the suburbs of Moscow the other day, and the Russian Federation has already reported that 13 UAVs have been intercepted and 3 more homes have been hit. Moscow residents reported less than 7 explosions in the capital. A video posted on social media earlier on Tuesday showed a low-flying drone exploding in a field outside Moscow, with others flying over houses in the city's expensive Rublyovka district or tower apartments in the southwestern neighborhoods. A Russian security guard said, "I was woken up by a loud explosion at 6:15 am. And there were about 6 more explosions every 10 minutes for the next 45 minutes. It started happening at 6 a.m. Our house was shaking." Dmitry, who lives in the Pine Forest-covered Odintsovo district just west of Moscow, said that there were 5 to 7 explosions. Russia's defense ministry said 8 drones had targeted the city in one night, but Russian media close to security services wrote that the number was much higher, with more than 30 drones involved in the attack. Drone attacks in Moscow brought the war in Ukraine to the streets of the capital, embarrassing Putin's government for the first time in its 16-month war in Ukraine. Moscow has been targeted by a large-scale drone strike. This marked a new turning point in the conflict, and the Kremlin threatened to take the harshest possible measures in response to the strikes. Neighborhoods where drones have been detected include Krasnogorsk and Odintsovsky districts along the Rublyovka-Uspenskaya highway in the famous Rublyovka. Russian authorities blamed Ukraine for the drone strikes, which involved 8 drones and caused minor damage to several buildings. Ukraine has welcomed the news, although it denies any role in the attack. The attack, which caused minor damage to 3 apartments, angered Russia's hawks and criticized Vladimir Putin and senior military officials for failing to protect the heart of the Kremlin power. 500 kilometers or 310 miles from the front line. So what is the reason for these attacks to have an earthquake effect in the Kremlin? The most notable were the explosions that occurred in the famous Rublyovka, the most elite residence in the Russian Federation in general. Rublyovka is a group of elite residential towns located 10 kilometers west of Moscow. Putin's residences and, most importantly, the elite cottages of Kremlin officials and oligarchs are located along the Rublyov-Uspensky highway in Rublyovka. Why are the attacks on Rublyovka of strategic and psychological importance? At first glance, such attacks do not have a strategic effect because they do not attack military or industrial facilities. But it's quite possible that precisely such strikes will have a much greater effect. First of all, Moscow elites and residents are in great fear as Moscow has been attacked for the 3rd time by a drone swarm. And this is the heaviest of the 3. A swarm of drone strikes targeting Moscow on Tuesday revealed glaring breaches in Moscow's air defense, further alarming and worrying the Russian public. It is so obvious that drones hitting or targeting more than one area will have very serious socio-psychological consequences. There are already reports that thousands of Moscow residents have sold their homes or migrated directly to escape to safer areas along the Rublyovka-Uspensky highway. With Putin's official residences Barvika and Novo-Ogaryovo, there are also elite hostels for officials, elites, and summer towns known since Soviet times. In particular, the price of a cottage in this area starts at several $1,000,000. The average price easily reaches $5 to $10 million, and the figures more than $30 to $40 million are quite common. The maximum possible concentration of homes of Russian oligarchs, high-ranking officials, and all other similar people is in Rublyovka as close as possible to the Kremlin. And at least at this time, drones are being shot over their heads. It is interesting that the Russian Federation will not even be able to turn it in favor of a strike against local residents because it will be necessary to show palaces and castles on television. And in the end, ordinary citizens of the Russian Federation are more likely to find support for such strikes than a sense of unity with representatives of the Kremlin elite because the Kremlin, oligarchs, and officials now see with their own eyes their personal vulnerability and the inability of the Putin regime to guarantee security. These people generally do not care about the losses of the Russian army because it does not affect them in any way. However, the threat of losing one's own life and property will directly affect them. Moreover, it serves as evidence of the regime's weakness, which is now critical to Putin. It is precisely because the Russian leader created the simplest system of vertical power, the basis of which is the undisputed priority of the power of the Kremlin. Moreover, more residents of Rublevka now have an extremely simple question. If drones fly to Moscow, what will happen when cruise missiles fly? In fact, with this attack, it is the first time that the war has come home for most Muscovites. So the psychological impact of these drones, which were shot down or at least harmlessly shot down at the epicenter of the affluent Moscow suburb on Russia's elite, is truly dramatic. Maybe in retrospect, this is some kind of turning point in the war. In a way, this undermines Putin's war effort as it shows that the capital is vulnerable to Ukrainian attacks. The drone strike on Moscow also highlighted the capital's vulnerability as more Russian territory came under fire amid prospects for a Ukrainian counterattack. When people are scared, they look for a safe place, and their homes no longer seem safe. The war has entered a different phase, as the Ukrainians have so far shown their potential to launch relatively large-scale attacks, albeit symbolic. Ukrainians want exactly that to do exactly that. This is a debate. But the short answer is pretty straightforward. They wanted to raise their own morale, and they wanted to demoralize Russia. And in that sense, this brings the war home and undoubtedly shows fear and hatred in Russian society. But above all, this attack undoubtedly shows the fear in the Russian elite and undermines one of Putin's narratives that the war is a little far off, which in turn undermines Moscow's smugness. Until now, residents of Moscow despise the war, and everyone was kind of ignoring it. But now, starting today, it becomes quite impossible for them to ignore. So what was the reaction of Moscow residents and Kremlin officials after the attacks? Pro-war Russian bloggers harshly criticized government officials, and Yevgeny Prigozhin, head of the Russian paramilitary Wagner Group, accused Russia's military leaders of failing to defend the country against drones. I was woken up by a loud explosion at 6:15 am. And there were about 6 more explosions every 10 minutes for the next 45 minutes, a Russian security guard said. It was a terrible situation. Everybody went out to their balcony or went out. Nobody understood what was going on, this security guard said. Some people were shocked, but nothing can surprise me anymore, the security guard said. I mean, Ukraine has already hit the Kremlin before. He was in the elite security community in Zhukovka, near where the strikes took place. It started happening at 6 a.m. Our house was shaking. Dmitry, who lives in the pine forest-covered Odintsovo district just west of Moscow, said that there were 5 to 7 explosions. Alexander Kinstein, a prominent member of the Russian parliament, wrote on his Telegram channel that UAVs were shot down in 5 different areas in the Moscow region. The elite, including the Novo-Ogaryovo state residence of Vladimir Putin. Numerous prominent officials and politicians reproached the defense ministry for allowing drones to enter Moscow's airspace. Among them were prominent war hawks who called for more aggressive attacks and wider mobilization for the war in Ukraine. Others noted that previous attacks had higher hit-value targets, including a drone strike that targeted the Kremlin earlier this month. As a result, the explosions that took place in many regions of Moscow, the capital of Russia, caused a great psychological collapse among the Moscow people and elites. Although the Kremlin denies it, as we have just mentioned, perhaps this is the purpose of the Ukrainians, because in Kiev, people live in tunnels, subways, and shelters every minute of every day. For them, it's a daily occurrence to see a Russian missile or a UAV explode at any moment. Aren't they afraid? Of course, they are afraid. However, for the sake of their freedom, unlike the Russians, they do not leave their homeland and fight for full independence. We hope that this aimless war will end as soon as possible, with Ukraine gaining full freedom and territorial integrity. The Eastern European steppes continue to be the scene of the modern world's old Soviet clashes between Ukrainian and Russian troops. While trench warfare continues to decrease in Bakhmut in the Donetsk region, it increases in settlements such as Severnovokuznetsk-Verkhovka in the woodlands and camouflage forest areas of Luhansk. Both trench warfare and strategic point-and-shoot attack operations come to the fore. Currently, the areas where activity is experienced in Luhansk include the residential areas up to Kremenostat of Kamienny Bridge and Stanitsia Luhanska. The Ukrainian armed forces are trying to focus on other front lines in the region while defending Kremlin state against the Russians with their hard fortified areas. The fact that the region is covered with forest lands is among the factors that facilitate this goal of Ukrainians. In addition, volunteer legionnaires working in the operational and intelligence fields for the Ukrainian army are another important factor contributing to this goal. Considering all this, it is not difficult to guess that the Ukrainians will already carry out an offensive operation in this region, especially a few days ago. The military activity along the front line between Kamieny Bridge and Stanitsia-Luhansk increased the odds that the Ukrainians would make an attempt. In addition, the increase of the Ukrainian Air Force's sorties on the Luhansk front line was another sign of this situation. So even the Russian troops in Luhansk seemed to expect the Ukrainian armed forces to launch either a drone attack or a missile attack using the Air Force. Vladimir Putin's army had recently started to increase its military supplies, both from the Russian border and from the front lines close to Luhansk. It was clear that something was going to happen. Finally, the expected attack from the Ukrainian army took place. A Su-24 bomber of the Ukrainian Air Force carried out a low flight and launched a missile attack on the Luhansk-Teplivaz facilities, which Russian troops used as a command and military equipment repair center. During the sortie carried out by the Su-24 bomber, a total of 4 explosions were heard at the Luhansk-Teplivaz facilities. Local residents said that the explosions were so severe that they were deafening. But the most striking aspect of the attack was that the Su-24 bomber fired UK-made Stormy Shadow missiles at the Luhansk-Teplivaz facility. The Ukrainian pilot had hit the target from 12. A massive fire broke out shortly after on the Luhansk-Teplivaz facility, which was hit by Stormy Shadow missiles. The Russian base in Luhansk was the largest main headquarters of the Russian army in Ukraine. When Ukrainian warplanes blow up the Russian rear front headquarters with Stormy Shadow from 250 kilometers, it will disrupt all operations of the Russian army in the east. Very striking images emerged of the Ukrainian forces destroying the Russian home base with incredible tactics. Video of the attack showed huge columns of smoke rising eerily over the city as massive explosions rang out. It was known that important Russian military equipment was located in this facility. Presumably, the Ukrainian Su-24 pilot also carried out accurate shots at the ammunition depot at the facility. The former locomotive factory, Luhansk-Teplivaz, was looted by Russian forces in 2015 before it was converted into a Russian military command center and equipment repair center. Since then, Russian troops have been using the facility as a command center rather than an equipment repair area. For this reason, it is thought that important Russian commanders may have been killed after the Stormy Shadow missile attack carried out by the Ukrainian Air Force using Su-24 fighter jets. The Russian army could not intervene immediately after this attack. This was due to the absence of assault brigades in the areas close to the Luhansk-Teplivaz facility. In these areas, there were mostly amateur units of volunteers mobilized into the Russian army. Likewise, the Ukrainian army has volunteer military units on the front lines in and around Luhansk. But the volunteer units of Ukrainians conduct only intelligence operations in some specific areas of Luhansk. In other words, the Ukrainian volunteer units may have provided the critical dot of the attack by the Ukrainian Air Force on Luhansk-Teplivaz. It is unclear who provided the strategic coordinates of the facility and how many Russian soldiers are housed there. The Ukrainian Air Force's attack on Luhansk-Teplivaz deprived the Russians of a crucial military resource and command center. Russian soldiers will no longer be able to repair their guns and tanks, which could give Ukraine a crucial advantage when trying to retake Luhansk. In addition, it seems that the pressure of the Ukrainians in Luhansk will increase thanks to this attack. If you remember, the Ukrainian forces carried out a major offensive operation in Burka recently and captured a large part of this settlement. After this operation, the Ukrainians wanted to create an attack corridor between Donetsk and Luhansk. The Ukrainian army, which managed to move towards the Luhansk line after Markivka, is now successfully carrying out their plans by attacking the Luhansk-Teplivaz facility. The Russians do not have a strong and regular military unit that can launch a counterattack in these areas. The closest military unit of the Russian army to the facility is the 1st Guards Tank Army. There is also the 993rd Anti-Aircraft Battalion near this facility, but neither Russian unit is close enough to intervene. In short, the Ukrainian forces started to get what they wanted on the front lines after Donetsk. So what will happen in Donbass now? The influence of the big offensive plans of the Ukrainians has proven to cover much wider areas, with the missile attacks on the facility used by the Russians in Luhansk. While there is no sharp activity in Bakhmut, Marinka and Solder at the moment, the fact that Ukrainians turned to Luhansk may be a sign that offensive operations and clashes will continue in this region. In addition, the severity of offensive operations on critical front lines such as Kremlin and Starkov may increase in the coming days. Ukrainian attacks on the Luhansk-Teplovoz facility could also trigger insurgent attacks near the Russian border line. The aim may be to put Russian troops in a dilemma in these regions. Therefore, attacks can be organized simultaneously. We can witness the offensive actions of the Free Legion groups supporting the Ukrainian army on the Ukrainian-Russian border lines in the same time period. Heavy repressive attack of the Ukrainian armed forces against Russian troops in Luhansk may also occur, so the Ukrainians can try to squeeze the Russians from both directions. Since the beginning of the week, attention is focused on the aftermath of the Novokakhovka dam collapse. However, it did not go unnoticed that the Ukrainian forces accelerated their activities along the front line, southeast of the city of Zaporizhia. Last day, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu stated that the Ukraine's 47th Mechanized Brigade made 4 attempts to cross Russian lines with up to 1,500 soldiers and 150 armored vehicles. Shoigu claims that the attacks were repelled and that the Ukrainian forces suffered significant losses in terms of both soldiers and weapons. The Ministry of Defense in Moscow released a drone video that allegedly showed a series of attacks on Ukrainian tanks during the same conflict. In response, Russian military blogger Semyon Prigov reported that Ukrainian armed forces were making progress south of Yuriev towards South Korea. Orekov is the town of Tokmak in the Russian-controlled region. Baikov said that the situation facing the Russian forces is very serious. Attention has been focused on this part of the front line for months. It is therefore no surprise that activity in Ukraine has increased, destroying Russia's land bridge to Crimea by pushing back Russian forces into the Sea of Azov is clearly a central military goal for Ukraine. Tokmak is located on the road to Melitopol, one of the 3 major cities under Russian control very close to the coast. The Ukrainian officials have said little about how things are going. President Vladimir Zelensky in his speech last night described the situation as very tough wars. The difficult conflicts between Russia and Ukraine ended against Moscow army. The Ukrainian Air Force has launched 19 attacks on Russian manpower clusters and 5 attacks targeting Russian anti-aircraft missile systems in the past 24 hours. As a result of the attacks, the armed forces of Ukraine eliminated 800 Russian soldiers on the front lines in the past day alone. About 211,150 Russian soldiers died in Ukraine. The days are quite active on the Eastern Front as well as the southern axis of Ukraine. Defense offensive operation continues in the Donetsk region. Ukrainian defense forces are successful not only on the flanks around Bakhmut, but also in other parts of the front. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky praised his troops for alleged advances near the devastated city of Bakhmut, while Russia claimed it had repelled a large-scale offensive. The counterclaims came as Pope Francis's peace envoy, Italian Cardinal Matteo Zuppi, arrived in Kiev for 2 days of talks. Previously, Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine Heinmeyer had made some achievements on the battlefield. Heinmeyer stated that the Bakhmut region continues to be the epicenter of conflicts. Maliar stated that they are advancing on a very broad front there. In addition, a senior Russian war correspondent, Alexander Kots, noted that the battles continued around Volodar in the south of the Donetsk region and further north in Solder and Bakhmut, which were occupied by Moscow forces after months of fighting. Kots reported that Ukrainian forces were conducting offensive operations in and around Bakhmut, but suggested that Kiev had not yet brought the main forces into battle. Also, Prigozhin announced that Ukrainian troops had made gains near Bakhmut. Wagner Group leaders said that the Russian troops were gradually leaving the village of Bykovka, near Bakhmut, and that it was a disgrace after the situation in and around Bakhmut. Mariinka remains the number 2 hotspot. It was once again confirmed that the Russian troops will continue to focus their main efforts on attempts to completely occupy the Luhansk region. More than 40 clashes took place in the operational zone of the defense forces in the direction of Tavria the other day. Russian troops continue their offensive operations in the direction of Andriivka. On the other hand, the four-day Ukrainian offensive near Bakhmut and western Zaporizhia. The new offensive action near the border of Zaporizhia and Donetsk regions indicates the beginning of a new phase of the counterattack. After weeks of forming activities before a counteroffensive, offensive attacks took place by the Ukrainian military forces around Bakhmut and the next region southwest of Orikhiv in the western Zaporizhia region and around Velika Novosilka, near the border of Zaporizhia and Donetsk. According to Ukrainian Deputy Defense Minister Hein Weyer and Ukraine's official spokesperson, Sarai Sharavathi. Since Sunday, June 4th, Ukrainian troops have been hitting Russian positions on the southern and northern flanks of Bakhmut. Ukrainian Eastern military forces advanced up to 1,600 meters. According to the Institute for War Studies, since Sunday, June 4th, Ukrainian troops have conducted operations against Russian positions in the occupied western Zaporizhia region, including those 15 kilometers southwest of the city of Orikhiv. In its daily campaign update is reported that Ukrainian forces launched a limited but still significant offensive in the western Upper region on the night of June 7th and 8th. The is reported that Russian sources began reporting late at night on 7th of June that elements of the Ukrainian brigades equipped with Western equipment launched an offensive with Robertson to the southwest of Orikhiv in the western Zaporizhia region with the aim of breaking through the Russian defensive line. Geolocation images indicated that Ukrainian forces most likely passed the first line of defense in this area. According to the CW, however, geolocation images showed that the Russian elements succeeded in the counterattack and eventually pushed the Ukrainian forces back to their original positions. The Russian military information platform reported that significant ground attacks are ongoing in Ukraine. Senior Ukrainian officials confirmed the fact of the war, but denied that the last day's clash was the main offensive. In another development, the collapse of the Novokakhovka Dam on the Dnipro River in southern Ukraine virtually ends all hope that Kiev troops can launch a successful offensive on the waterway. According to an advisor from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, the collapse of the dam, which occurred after a series of eruptions reported on Monday night, caused severe flooding in the lower Dnipro River basin. Currently, hundreds of thousands of people in the region are being evacuated. The river forms part of the front line between Ukraine and Russian forces. The Kherson part of the front line became one of the possible sites for the long-awaited spring-summer counter-offensive of Ukraine. Andrei Zagorodnyk, an advisor to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, expressed that an amphibious attack along the Dnipro is now unlikely. Andrei Zagorodnyk claimed that Moscow would not take responsibility for the disaster, saying that the collapse was pure terror. Zagorodnyk said that blowing up the dam is to divert attention from the counterattack and prevent Ukrainian forces from crossing the Dnipro. Kiev blamed Russian troops for the disaster when President Vladimir Zelensky branded Russian forces as terrorists. Ukraine had previously warned that Russian troops mined the dam, preparing it for destruction if Ukraine advanced further. So how do armies turn water into a weapon of war? Barriers and dams are some of the oldest pieces of infrastructure known to human civilization, and warfare is perhaps humanity's oldest social activity. We have many examples of states destroying the infrastructure that traps or channels water in order to win military victories. Indeed, in some cases, the militarization of water infrastructure has been critical to nations' survival strategies. For example, the most important use of water as a weapon in the history of modern warfare came in June 1938, when China's nationalist government crossed the Yellow River embankments to slow the advance of the Imperial Japanese Army during the Second Sino-Japanese War. Weirs were the heart of a water management system at the absolute core of 2,500 years of Chinese civilization. As a result, we do not yet know who crossed the Kakhovka Dam. We do not know how the crossing of the dam will affect the course of the Ukrainian counteroffensive in the next few weeks. More evidence may emerge that clearly defines a clear group of perpetrators and the decision-making process behind the violation. But it should come as no surprise that the water infrastructure at the very center of human civilization has become a part of this war. The damage to this dam is the latest indication that Russia and Ukraine are waging an almost all-out war for the future of the region.